Hello again and welcome to the Prince Magnum channel. This is going to be a special episode of In Your Face. Here we're going to briefly talk about what happened to our classic cars. You'll note that I am not going to really be in videotaping myself. I'm not really going to be a part of this in a physical sense. You're just going to hear my voice. So if you get tired of the video, turn the volume down and just take in all the fun facts that go along with all of these cars. Okay. Let's go back in time to 1969. In 1969, there was a great sense of urgency from the insurance companies due to the fact that cars had just gotten so ridiculously fast. There actually was a list in the 1960s that basically said not to insure certain vehicles. Well, in 1970, the federal government stepped in and gave the car companies the big three or four if you at that time, because there was a company called AMC that was later bought out by the Chrysler Corporation. But the big three were allowed one last great hurrah, ushering in the end of the muscle car at the end of 1970. Well, with the gas crisis now full in effect in the 1970s, car manufacturers went out of their way to basically make cars more fuel efficient. Horsepower levels dropped dramatically, but we did get our fuel economy, and then carburation had finally reached a point where it was fuel efficient. So by the end of the 1970s and the beginning of the early 80s, a carburetor could get very good gas mileage. However, at that time, there was this thing where the American market kind of opened up to the Japanese import. Well, the problem then became that the imports, they wanted to open it up a little bit more, and I don't. Some people will speculate and give conspiracy theories, and there are some stories where certain carburetors got huge amounts of fuel economy that certain people would show up and take their carburetor. I'm not going to get into that, but there was this whole thing that there was a propaganda effort that basically made us believe that all of the old cars were just gas hogs, and this really wasn't true. There was also a problem that Vietnam had pretty well come to a close, and people really just wanted to not pay attention. A lot of it had to do with a lot of hippies, and I guess they were just too stoned to actually take care of their cars. So there was that half-truth that cars were very, very, they just didn't do a very good job of staying clean because they were pumping a lot of pollutants in because people just weren't taking care of them. So in came fuel injection. Now on through the years, carburation still was a thing. Fuel injection didn't really come into its own until about the mid-1990s, but people still use carburetors a lot through those years. Well, come the late 80s, cars like the Maverick, let's not forget the Ford Granada, and there's just a long list of cars that have been forgotten to history that were basically sent to the scrap heap in the late 80s because scrap prices were so high and a person could turn a nice little profit on that. So many of those cars were actually lost to history. On through the 90s, we'd heard stories where great cars were being crushed, and our government was actually from time to time threatening to say that cars 10 years and older had to come off the road. Unfortunately, this never came to light, thanks to a president like Bill Clinton, who owned a classic Mustang from the '60s himself. So presidents like Bill Clinton actually protected those cars. Of course, on through the years, with the rising gas prices after 9/11 and things like that, more and more of our classic cars came off the road because there was still that propaganda going around that old cars used a lot of gas. And that just really wasn't as true as many would like to believe. The carburation of those engines, if a person knew what they were doing and could tune them in right, could get huge amounts of fuel economy. As a matter of fact, I myself actually had a 1980 Chevy Malibu station wagon, which was ugly as sin, and it was probably one of the ugliest Chevys I've ever owned in my life. Actually got 32 miles to the gallon after having its carburetor rebuilt. And it had a little 267 V8, the cousin of the 305. So we've actually seen where our old cars have been kind of taken from us just because of a propaganda, and many of us fell for it. Uh, Today, there's this whole thing where people are saying, the cash for clunkers was really what hurt the old muscle cars and our great American cars like that. Because as soon as they said, they'll take all the old cars they can get, and basically you bring in your new car, you got X amount of money, it didn't matter, blah blah blah, and that whole sort of thing. The old cars. Uh, Pretty much all of them went to the crusher. So we actually lost a great deal of many classic cars for the cash for clunkers. Fortunately, cars like Project Spirit, a 1975 Ford Maverick, managed to survive, and thankfully she has, because now Project Spirit is back on the road, and she does get great fuel economy. But we're a long ways from done, building her. And I'm actually guesstimating that if we take our time and build her right, we'll be seeing gas mileage upwards around 35 miles to the gallon, which is actually better as far as six cylinders go than most of the six cylinders of today. Um, and on top of that, I don't need a computer to tune it in. I can use maybe like a screwdriver that I bought for $1 at, say, like Dollar Tree or AutoZone or wherever. Um, and that just, that to me is more economical. Um, so you're gonna, if if you have a hard time believing, these facts, you're welcome to, talk to anybody, from back in the day. But promise you, a lot of people, my age and just slightly older, we do occasionally fall for that. That the old cars were very much gas hogs, that they would pass everything but a gas station was a term that we commonly heard back then. And that's just not true. That is just so not true. Because the cars from, I'm going to say, about 1975 all the way up to about 1980, they were very fuel efficient. Um, and you just had to know what you're looking for. There are stories where even cars like my Maverick were actually getting upwards around 60 miles to the gallon, but I've only talked to one person who was capable of achieving that. So we did actually solve that gas problem back in the 1970s, but it's just unfortunate that our government is actually still trying to deny that this is actually happening. The car companies do the same thing. It's just, you're going to hear that. Fortunately for us, old hot rodders, we're very much in luck because carburetor technology did not stop with the invention of fuel injection. Thankfully, there are still people today who build carburetors such as Holley and Edelbrock and things like that. You just got to know what you're looking for when you buy one of these carburetors. Make sure if you get a 4-barrel, make sure you get the ones with the jets up in the front of the carburetor that are smaller than the ones that are in the back. Also, use some discipline when you're driving this car. Keep your vehicles tuned up properly, and I promise you that they will actually run more fuel efficient than a new car today, including the Toyota Prius, which is actually a hybrid. Uh, just, take good care of your classics. It's time we start preserving our classics instead of crushing them, and stop listening to your government in this case. They're wrong. They're wrong. Listen to your old hot rodders. They're the ones who turn the wrenches on these cars. They know exactly what they're looking for, and they know exactly what to do. If you find one of these cars and you decide to put them back on the road, make sure you find a reputable shop that has no problem whatsoever working on carbureted engines. If you can't find one, find you an old shade tree, and I'm sure they'll do it even for cheaper than you will at a garage. Just don't give up on the classics. I will give you a warning, though. If you find an old classic, you're going to find them in pretty rough condition nowadays. Rust is an issue, and back then the precision machining of parts wasn't a thing. Actually, we were really crappy at building good suspension parts back in the day. We were actually very, very horrible at it. So if a car had over 100,000 miles back then, suspensions were usually falling apart by then. So just be forewarned, spend a little time, a little bit of effort on those suspensions, and they will handle as good as anything else, and they will last just as long, if not longer. But you just got to, once again, shop around, okay? You know, so that brings us to modern day. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I actually, this took me some time to compile all these pictures, and I actually got most of these pictures I actually got, of some of the classic cars from a PlayStation 2 video game, Gran Turismo 4, which allows you to save pictures and things like that to a flash drive. So I actually loaded these into my computer and used Movie Maker, Windows Movie Maker to do this whole thing. So I hope you all enjoyed it. And just for the record, if you're as much of a an old car fanatic as myself, you probably are you're probably aroused by all these pictures of these old cars. And also, all of the little fun facts that you see coming up on here, most of these I actually learned back when I was 16 and 17 years old when I first started turning wrenches. And as I'm making this now, I'm actually 36. So it's amazing I've been able to remember all these little fun facts. And I know my wife has actually enjoyed learning a little bit more about American cars from our past than ever before. This video has actually been kind of informative to her too. So this brings us to the end of this episode of In Your Face. It was something a little bit different. Like if you would, subscribe if you would. Maybe get enough of these subscriptions. Maybe I could do more stuff like this for y'all. In the meantime, get out there and build a project for me while you're at it. And if nobody's told you that they love you, Prince Magnum does. God bless you and have a happy 24. Thank you.